was the responsible for leadership development, spearheading leadership development for the Kentucky Annual Conference of Methodist Churches. Now he's the Chief Strategic Officer of the Kentucky Methodist Children's Homes.
Oh, wow. That's great.
So, I mean, obviously, I believe that his most distinguishing factor is surviving the program with me, but he's gone on to do some other okay work.
Well, Matthew, just for your information, one of my daughters, Patty Walker, is a minister in the Methodist Church in Colorado Springs, and they use her sometimes to plant new churches. So, and I was born a Methodist, so we have a little bit of a joint heritage. It sounds like you've been doing a lot of really nice things, good things to make the world better.
Well, thank you so much. It's been quite a journey, to put it mildly. So it's great. It's great to be back with you all.
Good, and you probably have a sweatshirt that says "I survived Nicole."
It's more like I do believe that I don't know that I would have quite made it to the finish line without her. So I think that might be a little bit reversed.
I survived because of Nicole.
There we go. I think that's the sweatshirt.
There'd probably be several people that would buy that shirt.
Oh. I feel like that was kind of like the blind leading the blind. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking time out of your week to have a conversation with me. For the last several years, the Walker Fellows have been talking about different ways to contribute to the DEL program overall. And the current steward of the Walker Fellows, Caesar Kellum, asked me if I would be interested in supporting a DEL outcomes-based objective that he's referring to as master classes. And so the purpose of a master class is an opportunity to discuss a topic a little bit more in depth and kind of have a conversation or a dialogue around why we think that thing is important, and kind of build out the topic for future audiences, since they're not always going to be able to sit in and have a conversation with us. So originally, I came up with a list of different topics, and then I started thinking about where I wanted to start. And you both came to mind when I started to think about communication. As I think it went in the email, but two human beings who, one has a job to be a communicator, the other holds a PhD in theoretical physics, arguably a challenging thing to communicate. And so as I've connected with you both through the program, what I've noticed is an ability to communicate well. And so what I was hoping for us to do today is to have a conversation about your approaches to communication and just facilitate a dialogue. You saw a question list. There's some short questions to kind of prompt our conversation, but I was wondering what your thoughts are. How do you approach communication? And Matthew, if you'd like to start us off, that'll give Dr. Walker some time to arrange his thoughts and add to the conversation.
Sure, I'm happy to kind of get us started. First of all, I love the approach, and I love how you're framing this entire experience, because the greatest content in the world quickly becomes worthless if there's no meaningful way to communicate it. I think in very practical terms, in communication and crafting communication, from my perspective, communication really is more about human connection. I'm preparing for a national conference here in just a few months, and the first questions that I want to ask are, what matters most to the people that I'm going to be interacting with? The size of the group makes a big difference in terms of the interaction possibilities and what we're trying to accomplish. Because at the end of the day, I know some of the biggest communication mistakes that I've made over the years have been twofold. Not taking into account and respecting the audience that I am working with, and forgetting that simple is always best. So there's kind of a story that comes to mind. It was early on, at least in pastoral ministry for me, and one of my supervisors came to visit. They attended a couple services and heard a few sermons, and then they scheduled a meeting with me. So I was all kind of puffed up and proud, feeling really good about myself. Like, yeah, they're coming to give me a pat on the back. And I'll never forget this. She sat down in my office and she asked me one of the most important questions I've ever been asked. She said, "How many hours did you spend preparing that sermon, that talk that you gave?" I said, "Well, I put about 20 hours into that. It's 20 hours of prep time, roughly." She said, "Well, how much time did you actually have to give that speech, that sermon?" I said, "Well, I think I timed it out to about 25, 30 minutes. She said, "If you really want folks to listen, and shockingly, if you really want folks to do something meaningfully, don't try to cram 20 hours worth of research into a 25-minute talk." And that's always stuck with me. Is part of our task is to be the resident expert, or to be at least a very informed person on the topic, to do the legwork and the deep work before we get into the room, and then ask the question, what's the most meaningful point that we can explore together in this moment with me and the audience, that's going to be memorable, that's going to stick, and that they're really going to care about, that they can actually apply, they can do something with it. Because if it's not helpful, if it's not inspiring or meaningful to the audience, it could be the greatest content in the world, but it'll stay stuck inside our brains and really may not make the kind of difference we want it to make in the real world. So maybe the role of every executive leader, for all of us, is to constantly be sharpening how we communicate. How do I take complicated, big picture concepts and distill it in a way that matters to you and matters to the audience that I'm with?
That's great. So Matthew, if I was understanding you correctly, I heard you ask the question, what's the most meaningful moment that needs to be communicated? And if I understood your message, what I took away from it was that content becomes meaningless if you can't communicate it. Is that the message, the moment that you were hoping to pass along in what you shared?
Yes. Yes, it was.
Okay.
That's spot on.
That's great. You did an excellent job focusing on the moment that needed to be communicated. Thank you. Dr. Walker, what are your thoughts? How would you like to respond?
Well, inspired by Matthew, first, I've been told, and it's been my experience, that one of the most important aspects about communication, there are various kinds of communication, but it has to do with communicating in a way that you deepen or engage someone's appreciation of the culture or the community you're in. So if you or I are in a room communicating with somebody, also in that room is all the past communications we've had with them, sitting there on their shoulder. And if you think about something that will facilitate someone's engagement in the community, because engagement in the community means they're perhaps going to be more receptive to the ideas, they're going to be more receptive to you. They're not having imaginary discussions about you while you're trying to communicate with them. And so one of the most important things is about culture and communicating is to ask yourself, well, as I'm communicating with this, are the person or persons I'm talking to more likely to be pleased and trust each other and pleased with me and my leadership role, pleased with the mission of the company or the organization. One of the most important parts about culture is how people feel about each other. So, for example, in the Dell program, some of the real advantages that I think that the faculty and students have created has to do with a sense of trust and feeling good about the program and each other. And that makes communication in all the other ways uh, much better. An example of a failure that I had in communication was about 2 days after I had gotten married to Erica, who is the smarter one. She's a children's librarian, and she was introducing me to Winnie the Pooh and all of these wonderful things that you would have thought I known, and I didn't. And it was just wonderful. And of course, I have a passion for physics, for theoretical physics, and so I was going to try to talk to her about theoretical physics. Now, there is a difference, as you could imagine, between Winnie the Pooh and children's literature and theoretical physics. I thought I was being clever, and I started with something scalar. And I said, do you know the difference between a vector and a scalar? And I started to explain this to her. And I could see a little tear coming down her eyes. And she finally said, George, we're still on our honeymoon. And I'm getting worried that I'm going to have to listen to this stuff that I really don't like and care about all my life because I'm not going to divorce you. And I thought, oh my goodness. I mean, I was just so, and probably about once every 2 or 3 years, I would say, are we ready for the vector and scalar discussion yet? Speed's a scalar, velocities is a vector because it has a direction. And she wouldn't let me get the first 3 words out. She said no. And so I've learned there are certain things that although everyone loves each other and everyone cares about each other, and everyone is certainly smart enough that there's certain allergies that exist. And if you're a husband, you best not talk to your wife about things that she has told you she doesn't want to hear about. And don't keep asking her every little while. She'll tell you if the situation has changed. So communication, you have to ask yourself, after you've decided that you want to make sure that the next communication you have with this person goes even easier because there's this engagement and bonding, pleasure bonding that's occurred because of your conversation. You want to make sure that they are ready and interested in what it is you have to say. Now, they may not be interested in one level because they don't care about the topic, but if it's business or if it's somewhere that you're trying to give them more information, for example, about the Bible and God's Word, they care about it. They may not know about it or think but they care about it because they're Christians and they're there knowing that you have that role to play. So there's the idea of the culture. Are they ready? Is it relevant? And then keep it simple, Jack. Keep it simple. I once was teaching physics for elementary school teachers. That was, in fact, the name of the course, Physics for Elementary School Teachers. Now, these are people who had planned their whole lives to avoid me. They weren't going to talk to a theoretical physicist. They were going to talk to a 6-year-old, which was much more interesting. And so I got in the room, started talking, and it turned out they said, you seem to have a good bedside manner, but we know you're going to strip us of all human dignity by giving us a physics test, and we're not going to have a clue what's going on. And I said, well, what's the hardest part about a physics test? And after they said the right answer, they said mathematics. They were supposed to have had high school algebra at least to get into college. This was at Indiana University. And there were 89 ladies and 1 gentleman in that course. And so we decided to spend the first month of the course, they making up their mathematics, their algebra, taking something across the equal sign, changing the sign of it. It's sort of like going through immigration to them, going across the equal sign. So what they did was they'd decide these rules, they'd argue about them, and then they'd vote on what the rules should be in their algebra. Took a month. My colleagues thought that was the biggest waste of time. When they got through, it was their math. They didn't have math anxiety. This was their math. Of course, things are close enough that you can't get it wrong. If you try to do algebra and make a rule that's not right, you'll have a contradiction pretty quickly because it's pretty fast. So it worked out. And they asked me, how is our algebra different than regular algebra? And I said, you nailed it. But the point was, it was theirs. They made it their own. So in communication, sometimes it's better to spend a little more time, perhaps, so that the person can feel it's their own. It's not me talking down to them or one of us talking down. So set the playing field in a way that they're contributing and able to ask questions as you go along. And I think at this stage, that's all I have to involve. I just want to say that, I would say an amen to what Matthew said.
That's so well said, Dr. Walker, because I agree. I mean, it's remarkable to me when I'm with even some of our young leaders here at the children's homes and coaching some of our supervisors and folks that are new to leadership roles. Almost every single conversation that we have initially is around a leader's discomfort with difficult conversations, or how to approach what's going to be maybe a contentious or an emotional conversation, or when you have to address something that's going wrong. And what I think is so interesting, and without fail, is the internal work that we have to do first, just our own processing and our own kind of emotional check that we do on the front end to ensure that we're in kind of that good, stable, well-grounded place before walking into what could be a difficult communication event or into a difficult conversation. Everybody likes the idea of leading. Nobody likes dealing with people who are difficult. Well, the struggle is, the vast amount of the leading that we do is navigating what could be difficult conversations or tricky relationships with people who maybe don't see what you can see, which is an area that needs to be improved. So I encourage all of our leaders, do the front end work of, if we're a recovering people pleaser, well, let's start to process that before we get in the room and we may have to disappoint someone with our conversation, or it might be a difficult moment. But that internal work, I think, is so pivotal.
To follow up on that, and that actually is the key. And that 20 hours you spent may have been trying to, it wasn't all content, I suspect. It was also trying to figure out how to say what you wanted to say. But I think that the idea of delivering bad news or a criticism or a subject that's almost taboo, you don't even want to use the words because they bring up wrong images to people. That great philosopher, Machiavelli, said, deliver bad news fast. Think like a lightning bolt. Deliver bad news fast, linger over good news. And he was talking about when they're in the same conversation. So if you're a doctor, you'd say you have a very serious disease, cancer, and the odds of a long survival are not very good. You say that quickly, we're looking right at them with a sympathetic voice, and then you spend the next half hour keeping hope alive by explaining all the things that one can do and all the positive things that can come of this. There'll be no pain. We have wonderful new things that are going on, and explaining all these things. Now, I don't know if that really works all the time, but the idea of delivering bad news fast and lingering over the good news and always keeping hope alive. And hope doesn't necessarily just mean that you're going to live 50 years. Hope can be that you're going to understand this algebra eventually. It's going to work. It's going to be your algebra and you're going to own it. And give examples, because if people have hope alive, they won't reject or turn off the rest of the conversation, I suppose, and they'll be more likely to take into consideration the good news that you're giving them and what they can do with all of the advantages that they will have subsequently. So in the Dell program, when people come in, over half of the people that I talked to, in the beginning, they'd let me talk to people one-on-one when they were new in the program. After a while, there wasn't enough time for that. But I spent an hour with each new student. And more than half of them said, if people knew how long it takes me to read something, or how little a scholarly background I have, or how little my vocabulary is, I feel like a fraud, they would say. And some of those people are our leaders. They all made it. I mean, most all of them, and it wasn't because they couldn't do it. But the question is, how in a conversation in the beginning, without being just a goody two-shoes type person, can we give them the hope and something to build on, that they'll be able to, as they naturally would, be able to successfully get through the program?
Oh, that's so brilliant, Dr. Walker. You touched on, I think, one of the big principles that I still live by. I have seen it embodied in your own leadership and how you've interacted with us in the Dell program and other Dell leaders. But I hold, and I believe it to be true, that every interaction is invitational. You meeting one-on-one with a leader or a person, creating space for vulnerability and for openness, that's a posture that you bring to the conversation. And that's an invitation for another individual to join you in that vulnerable space. And part of our task, I believe, as leaders, is to make sure that we're really clear on what we're inviting people toward in every communication, in every conversation. And Dr. Walker, you're such a master at doing this in interpersonal moments, and I just want to celebrate that.
Well, thank you, but you're all that way. We're all that way. I used to tell our children. We have 3 children. Patty is the one I mentioned that's a minister, and they would talk about these difficult conversations they were going to have, and and I would say things like, "Well, it's an opportunity," it's all that kind of thing. And so now she will call me up, and she's talking about some of her work as a minister, and she will say, "I had so many opportunities yesterday. I was tired by the time I got home." And one of the things, being the parents of a minister, and Patty is a wonderful, frisky, loving person, but she has a gift with her ability to speak and tell stories, and she often would use somebody in the family as the bad example in a sermon. So I would go into, when she was in Cleveland, I'd go into the church, and somebody would, "Oh, you're Patty's dad. Oh, yes, we've heard all about you in her sermons." And I imagine myself a combination of all the Old Testament bad examples that good stories. But she handles it in such a way. I mean, there's always humor in what she does, and so I've learned a lot from people younger than me, whether they're people, most of them younger than me. They're people in the Dell program. They're my own children. They're young students that I've had. So we need to be receptive when we may think we're the leader having the conversation and leading the conversation, but in fact, we're the recipient of wisdom and insights and God's gift that he's given other people. And a person like me who talks too much needs to be able to truly listen, with the idea of using this as an opportunity for me to learn, evolve, and change.
Yeah, that's great insight. Matthew invited me to learn a lot when we were in class together. So, thank goodness for the internet. But what you were saying, Dr. Walker, really resonated with me, because those one-on-one sessions were absolutely an opportunity to reflect on where you feel uncomfortable. And I think that what I'm capturing in our conversation today is that communication can be an opportunity for us to reflexively um, meet another person in dialogue to co-produce understanding. And And so one of the first things that I heard you say was that communication is about deepening appreciation of the culture, and increasing engagement in the community. And you also mentioned um, thinking about what we bring along with us. And when it comes to scholar practitionership, one of the things that I tend to focus on quite a bit is what I'm bringing with me, and how well am I sharing that as a steward of the information with others. Um, this thinking a lot about different as it relates to communication, as I've been reflecting on my own personal journey, and thinking about the theories of separate and connected knowing, and how when separate knowing, or this kind of positivist approach, or an objective understanding of what's going on in the environment, meets the way it feels to be in that environment. And when those two come together, there's this opportunity for relational knowing. And so when I think about developing conversation, whether I'm presenting to an audience or I'm having a one-on-one conversation, the things that I tend to think about are, okay, I'm hearing these objective bits of information. This is how you consider communication, and then thinking about how it feels. And the course of our conversation has kind of gone that way as well. We started talking about the different facets of communication that were important, and then started to talk about some of the more uncomfortable feelings, or the feelings that we can get when we're communicating or co-producing, that ultimately lead to your conversation about developing community and culture, or relational knowing, how we're bringing these bits and pieces of information together to understand. Now, one of the things that I heard you say, though, that I was really curious about, um, was how to say what you wanted to say. So I wrote it down, because one of the things that I think is interesting is that I don't know if we always talk about what happens before you start saying something. You have to determine that there's a message you want to share and select that message. So I'm curious if both of you would share a little bit about how you select a message that needs to be discussed, or needs to be thought through with others.
Well,
Who
I
wants to go
can
first?
I can start us off. um, I like the phrase, if you can't say it in a sentence, you won't be able to say it in an hour. Um, if I can't distill the main kind of backbone or core of the communication, if I cannot distill that into a sentence, then it's very likely that I'll find myself rambling or talking around the main idea. So, preparation, and what we teach our leaders here at the children's homes is to spend time preparing for whatever the conversation is going to be, by taking into account the individual or group that you're going to meet with, the desired outcome that you want to see as a result of this communication or presentation, what the expectations are of other people who are going to be in the room for this conversation, and what barriers, challenges, or issues that might get in between you and the desired connection you're trying to build in your communication. And once we've identified a lot of these key areas, then we can start to shape the correct approach. If it's a highly contentious conversation, then there needs to be a balance between information sharing and dialogue, because it's not necessarily about getting to the right answer. That's not often the goal. The goal is, can we collaboratively create a shared understanding of what we're trying to learn or do or create or experience together, so that we can all move from where we were to where we want to be together. When leaders get fixated on right and wrong, there's a time and a space for right and wrong. There is. But oftentimes I find that leaders want to jump there. Okay, well, we have to all walk there together. We have to all get there together if we really want to see meaningful community built. or a culture form, be it inside a Dell cohort or inside your workplace or even inside your family. It's easy to jump to fix it mode or to this is what's right and wrong, but to spend time preparing to how do we build connection, and am I seeing the people around me clearly enough to know how best to communicate and approach them.
Wow. And Nicole, I have nothing really to add to what Matthew said, and I don't want to subtract from it, so I'll just use a subtext. Maybe fill in a blank under, part B, C, A, B, C under those general tenets. It's terrific, Matthew. First, I would say that to the extent that, knowing the person that you're talking to, if you have the time and it's that kind of situation, we all have, I call them the 3 Ps: personality, a philosophy, and a psychology. And by those words, in this context, I mean, let's suppose that you believe you should share, that you should be very generous with other people. Suppose that's one of your basic philosophical tenets, that if you have extra milk, you should be figuring out a way to provide for those that don't have enough milk. I think most of us, would say that's a good part of our philosophy to have. But when you were young, you may have heard the milkman say to your mother, "You're not getting any more milk till you pay your bills." And so you have in your psychology a situation that maybe we better hoard milk because you never know when the milkman's not going to give you any more. And so your philosophy says share, but your sense of survival says keep it. And then there's also, in terms of personality, there are extroverts and introverts, let's say, in this simplified world. And so you could have all those other characteristics, philosophically and psychologically, but have a different personality. And if you're talking with someone, it's useful to the extent that you can, and most often I can't, to ask myself, what do I know about this person's philosophy, psychology, and personality, so that as we have this conversation, discussion, I don't say things that set off landmines to them. Those 3 things, and but we don't have control over much, perhaps, thank goodness. But I was having office hours, and I always kept my door open. I was probably 33, 34 years old. I was teaching beginning physics, freshman physics. I had about 150 students in the class. 50 of them were pre-med that didn't care. I mean, well, most of them, nobody says, "Oh gosh, I hope I get into physics this year." Um, so there weren't a lot of true believers in there. So this one young lady came in at office hours, and I thought, well, she's going to be worried about physics, and I've got to give her hope and explain things and give her some ideas and just, to study. And she comes into my office and she says, this is a difficult discussion for me to have with you now, actually, because I feel it. After a little while, she said, well, my dad's a doctor and my grandfather was a doctor, and I really want to be a doctor. I said, well, that's terrific. And she said, so I've got to get a good grade in this course. I said, well, together we can do that. You got to study and keep active. And she said, no, Dr. Walker, I'm telling you, I'm willing to do anything to get an A in this course. And she gave me that look, older than mankind. And of course, I turned beet red. And she said, just so you won't worry about it, I'm going to say we did things even if we didn't, if you don't help me. Okay. So here was for me, I wasn't ready for that. And I remember it as one of the most difficult and horrifying discussions I ever had. What would you do? Somebody says that to you, and they're just looking at you like they mean it. I mean, what she put in me was fear. I saw my whole career going down the thing here because I didn't know exactly what I could do. And then something just clicked. Let's say it was God or something, probably. And I said, how do you feel about yourself right now? I said, you seem to be a person that has everything that you could want in the world. You're going to be great. And you come in and you say something like that. That belittles you in ways that nobody else could ever belittle you. Think about that. And it worked. A lot of times it wouldn't work, but it happened to work. My colleague across the hall, who was also a theoretical physicist and a good friend, we get reviewed every once in a while, and the students write reviews, and he put in my stack of 120 review things something that said, you were a good professor, but why did I have to meet with you with a short skirt at 11 o'clock at night? And he put that in the reviews that I'm not to see. You see, those go directly and get collated, and the person that was collating came to me and said, this doesn't look right, and it showed me that. And of course, again, I had that moment where I thought everything's going to just absolutely disappear in my life. And I hear my colleague across the hall laughing and saying, you get so uptight. I thought I would send you a message that if you're going to get wiped out, you're going to get wiped out, and that these things happen anyhow. And of course, we had a very purposeful conversation as a result of that between the two of us. But sometimes some of the most important conversations we'll ever have are not planned. You didn't know it was coming. It's not with people who are all of a sense of goodness and all that. It's people who have seen as a result of their interactions in the world that certain kind of attitudes, certain strategies work. I'm sure this wasn't the first time that young lady had tried something like that. And sometimes it isn't best to fight fire with fire. It's best to fight fire with kindness and goodness and reminding people that they're more than what they're trying to do. So I know that got us off schedule, but sometimes conversations are not planned, and sometimes conversations are not the kind we would ever expect. I've had thousands of students, thousands, and I've never had anybody do anything like that since then. Never
I think
happened.
this is gold, solid gold, Dr. Walker, because you've touched on, I think, the hallmark of communication and one of the biggest tripping points that most leaders fall into. Because even that interaction with the student, when the student was essentially attempting a very inappropriate blackmail against you, trying to get what they perceived that they wanted. But your response in that moment sounds like a combination of several things operating. There's no way to prepare for every scenario or for people with ill intentions who are coming to blindside you. And if you're going to lead, expect that there's some people that are going to come fully loaded at you from the blind side. And it's a part of it. But what you just illustrated is you had already come prepared with your own character and integrity that you had already been working on long prior to that moment of interaction. And there's a part of you that's wired in that moment to already start looking at people as people. So even this young person that came to you fully loaded, apparently feeling as though she was going to get some leverage, the character work that you had already done internally, knowing your values, who you are, what's most important to you, and your ability to see people as people helped you diffuse a situation that you had no way to prepare for in advance. I think that's huge and something that we can all continually improve on and learn from.
And I do think that there are divine, I happen to be a person that feels that there are divine interventions every once in a while, and or maybe preparing for it. I don't know when that comes, but I just believe in everyone. If you can, part of the communication, you never want to make anyone feel diminished. And someone was trying to, somebody was calling me, and I was diverting them. I think that once there was a great teacher, and this is an absolutely true story. He almost won a Nobel Prize. He was a colleague of mine when I was relatively new in physics, and he was just everything. And his office was down the hall, in the same hall where I had that colleague that was so helpful. He noticed me spending too much time, he thought, in my office hours. If you have 150 students, you can have the office hours can be elongated. So he came over to me and said, you know, we hired you mainly to be a researcher. I mean, you'll teach, we all have to teach, but you know, and I said, well, but the thing is, I really enjoy the teaching. And I said, you are a master teacher. You're a role model. And he said, and this was discouraging. He said, well, let me explain something to you, George. You can't handle all these people that come to you for office hours, but you want them to leave thinking it's their fault and not your fault that they're not able to do something. He said, so he showed me some techniques that you can use when people come to your office. You know, have you really read the material? Do you really do this? That in the end, make them see how terrible they are and how awful it was of them to come and waste your time. And he said, and they never come back. He said, the great part is I don't have to worry about them anymore because they'll never come back to my office. See, the part he left out was keeping hope alive. I mean, it may have been true that the student needed to do, well, we all do, more preparation and more this or more that. But he was doing it mainly just so he would still have a good reputation and he wouldn't have to be bothered with them anymore. It's a trick that any leader can do to get rid of people that are pests. You make them think it's their problem, not yours, and that you're still the great person and they're just a pain in the neck. And you try to prove it to them by having these manipulative discussions. And that's just terrible. That misses the mark so badly. One of the great opportunities in leaders is by using hope and keeping it alive. You can create from situations that don't look like much future leaders. You know, you're not really a leader until you create other leaders or develop them. You don't create them, you help develop them. And when someone comes to you in need, in honest need, you want to make sure that you don't think about yourself to the point where you, in his case, I thought actually was being that was reprehensible. It seemed to me. Uh, I think, though, in his favor, I should say, he was probably being frisky with me because he wanted to make an impression because he didn't want me to spend all that time in office hours. It turns out you can love both teaching and research. They're different aspects of the same thing, and you don't have to choose one over the other. But he, you know, he was really old. He was in his 50s when he talked to me, and I was 33 or something. You know, I've learned to have a different perspective at age 83 about these things. Anyhow, uh, his 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 opportunity for leadership and communication, he was misusing it.
I think that's a beautiful perspective. And one of the things that really resonated with me that I heard you both talk about is the inside work. So that philosophical, psychological, or personal grounding so that you can communicate authentically and from a place of authenticity, but also accepting the people to whom you're communicating as whole in themselves. Um, and one of the things that I heard you say that made me actually think about um, how communication can support doctoral studies. So as individuals are going into scholarship, perhaps pursuing a terminal degree or taking their leadership journey to another level by developing, Matthew, I know you do a lot of development with your team. As stewards of communication, I'm curious if you would add anything, because what I've heard so far is to thine own self be true, right? Be familiar with your philosophical grounding, be familiar with the impact of life on your psychology and what feels comfortable to you as a person. But I've also I'm interested how you integrate that capability to co-produce with another individual with practice in an educational environment, whether it's doctoral studies or in ministry, that type of thing. And I can rephrase the question if that was out of control.
No, it's perfect. I love where you're headed with this, because I continue to find, and I think about the Dell program and other areas, let's just zero in on the Dell program specifically. There are not many places that we will find like the Dell program, and to utilize that as the gift that it is, let it be your laboratory to experiment and refine and even try new communication approaches. Most of us at a certain point get very comfortable in a rut or a rhythm of how we communicate, or how to put together a presentation or a slide deck or this, that, and the other, or the dreaded team assignments and group assignments where we're trying to divide things up and then who speaks when, and we've all been there. Let's just call it what it is.
I'm feeling personally attacked. Yes.
No, but I'm always on the hunt, and there's so few spaces like the Dell program and others like it where treated as a safe to fail learning laboratory. I have yet to find in my own life or anywhere else, almost every single breakthrough starts with a breakdown somewhere. When we get to the point where we say this isn't working, or I tried it and it failed, and that leads us to a space of maybe a new understanding, or a new way of relating to our colleagues or fellow students, or a new approach that we've never thought about before. Sometimes we rob ourselves of becoming a better communicator because we tend to play it safe. We tend to kind of do the things that we've always done, or the way that we've done it in a similar way. So I think that to kind of bring this home to a singular point is to stay curious when it comes to crafting communication and the experience of doing this inside the Dell program or in any environment. That when you approach a group project, instead of just assuming that it's going to flow a certain way, or that you have to abide by these certain set of parameters, start asking questions and be curious. What would it be like to try something different? What would it be like if we tried a different way of communicating in this moment? And then to not be afraid, even in the midst of communication, to stop and ask a clarifying question of your audience. Help me understand if we're on the right track right now. Help me understand if how we're communicating is the most effective, or is there a way that would be more engaging? It's a wonderful opportunity inside the Dell program, and we can create these spaces for ourselves as leaders in the environments we work in if we create that level of trust. There's a huge opportunity to be had for all of us Dell folk if we choose to stay curious, experiment with ways to communicate.
That's great.
Matthew, that was tremendous. I mean, curiosity, to have the gift of curiosity all your life is a great gift, and I think you've just nailed it. One of the disadvantages sometimes of being young is you haven't had an opportunity to fail enough yet, and one of the disadvantages of being old is you can't remember all those failures anymore. So, but you mentioned you try a different way, and that's been. I'll give you two examples of where we were failing, and we tried a different way. One was maybe 50 years ago. We were having arguments in the physics community about what kind of an accelerator should be built. Should it be one that accelerated this elementary particle, or that protons or photons or electrons and all that? And we were fighting, and the community was bad mouthing. It was like politics. You got to you bad mouth the other person, you see, and say that their accelerator won't do certain things. And then, of course, that hurts everybody because there are a lot of people out there that don't want any accelerators built, right? They'd rather have something else done. And so I was at, it was shortly after I went from being a place that wanted one kind of accelerator to another. And I could see that if you had several accelerators, it's like a detective story. You'd see things from different points of view, different clues, and you'd find out what you wanted to find out better if you had 2 or 3 of the 10 possible than just one. And of course, nobody was willing to listen to that because that might mean that you were giving the other person a leg up that their accelerator would be built. So play and humor and doing things really weirdly is the only thing left. So in Guys and Dolls, there's a song, Fugue for Tin Horns. It's about a bunch of gamblers. Each one thinks their horse is going to win the race. And they sing this quartet. You know, I got the horse right here. The name is Paul Revere. Here's a guy that thinks the weather's clear. Can do. Anyhow, so what I did was just to take 4 different kinds of accelerators and elementary particles. I got the probe right here, you know, blah, 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 so that we could sing a song about 4 different kinds of accelerators and why they would be so good together, you see. And, well, who the heck is going to ever let you sing a song? Well, at the American Physical Society, you're allowed to get up and give a 15-minute talk if you're a member about anything. So you can give this little song. So it's novel, it's silly, people would think. On the other hand, it makes the point. It gets under the laser shields of the defenses of people and got people thinking. So that was one example of communicating in a different way. Words weren't working, so let's use Broadway. Let's use some music. The other one was trying to get interdisciplinary projects going at a university, trying to have an interdisciplinary doctorate, which the Dell program is a true example of interdisciplinary all over the place. I mean, leadership is, you know, everything. And we couldn't get it done because the NSF wasn't funding certain things. The boards of trustees were against it. The individual department chairs didn't want something coming up like that. So all the establishment was against it. So I didn't make up all the lines at all, but a colleague of mine wrote a play then, where each person would be represented in the play of all the reasons you shouldn't do this. And there were these 2 faculty members, made sure that they were from different disciplines, 2 different genders, everything. And they would go hand in hand in front of these people, and the people would give these blistering, but said in a way that showed that they were just trying to feather their own nest, reasons you shouldn't do it. Wrote this play, and the president of the university at the time, I was the vice president then, said, okay, you got one chance. If this doesn't work, I'm not going to go any more along with any of your harebrained ideas. And the idea was we would make the trustees say the things that were the no's. They would be the no people. So they got a script where they were supposed to say, no, you can't do it because of this and this. And these faculty members would go around hat in hand and stand in front of different trustees. One would be representing the funding agencies, another the university administration, another the board of trustees, another department chair. And each way, these poor faculty members became, you know, everybody wanted them to win after a while. Everybody, and the other trustees started booing the person who was saying no, that they couldn't do it because it was so heartless. And the trustee had to say, well, no, I don't really think this way. It's just written here. I have to say these things, you see. Well, it changed the whole thing because we could have play and we could do this. And so that was another example where it wasn't working, but you used the play and then you put words into the mouths of the people who were saying no, and they realized then how contrary it was. And that worked. So my experience is, even if it seems silly, if it's got a wonderful cause for it, I mean, sometimes I think we gain more in our organized religions by being a little less straight-laced and a little more time for play, because I believe God really, when we're doing things where we're just doing play, I'm not talking about play that harms other people. I'm talking about humor in a certain sense, a humanitarian humor. I think that God uses that to great advantage and us as vehicles in that situation.
Oh, that's so well said. I mean, I can usually gauge when I'm called in for conflict mediation with teams or agencies, I can gauge how well it's going to go based on just observing their interaction and how much laughter is in the room. Because where there's laughter, there's hope, and there's a different level of trust and human connection. When there's not that present, communication becomes a much more different and sometimes difficult task.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. You know, I was thinking as you both were sharing, I was thinking about kind of the one of the overarching messages that came through the research that the team you facilitated, Dr. Walker, in the formation of scholars communicated, which is a need for interdisciplinary approaches to sharing information and appreciating that, you know, you can have a specialty area, but unless you're able to communicate that specialty area and exciting and interesting to others, then it's just going to stand over there on its own. And I feel like our conversation today, as I'm thinking about what advice we can give DEL students in their first, second, and third year, some of the themes that I feel like I'm hearing are, you know, focusing on how we transcend cultural boundaries. So if we're theoretical physicists, how do we make that message or that educational moment into something that's tangible or real? And we can use a variety of different devices to do that, like humor um, or context building. Um, so I guess, you know, kind of as my final question to you both, and I'm aware we're right at the 1 hour mark, so I don't want to keep you too much longer. If you were to think about the different years of scholarship in the program, what advice would you have for our DEL students as they think about communicating for their first year, their second year, and their third year?
It's a big question. You know, for first year, the entire first year of the Dell program is kind of like learning a new language and exercising a new set of muscles. And I think there's a lot of freedom in there, as long as we'll have grace for ourselves. No one is expecting you to be perfect out of the get-go. What the expectation is that we'll prioritize learning and growth over perfection. So some of that first year is unlearning some habits that we've learned over time. If you're a high achiever type A personality, would you just stop looking at your grades, please? Just stop it. Don't worry about it anymore. Just put it aside. When you think about communicating, start thinking about, what do I really want to learn about how to communicate and who I want to become as a communicator? That's a great way to start in the first year. In the second year, as you begin to start refining and focusing in, now it's, okay, what does my voice sound like as a communicator? So whether I'm talking to a group of people or interacting with a small team or talking one-on-one with another person, where does my, like Dr. Walker said, where's my personality and my philosophy and just the pragmatics of who I am and who I want to be? How does that impact my voice as a communicator? And then by the time we reach the third year, now we need to be asking the question, how does my communication contribute to the broader community of scholars and to the world and to other leaders? So I'm asking different questions each step of the way that create space for me to learn and experiment and be curious without putting all the pressure on the front end to get it perfect. Stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be curious about better ways to connect with other people through communication.
Matthew must have been listening, Nicole, to our discussion at the beginning about not being perfect. That was great,
No,
Matthew.
Matthew just watched me be imperfect for so what he's
Stop it.
sharing. are key phrases of conversations that we had during years 1, 2, and 3. If I had a nickel for every time Matthew said, "Nicole, give yourself some grace," I wouldn't need to work right now. But but I think you're absolutely right. There, that first year, we ask a lot of our students to try to connect the material to their practice. And so I think that there's like Dr. Walker was saying earlier, there's all this baggage that we bring with us on what we think scholarship is supposed to look like. And especially if we come into the arena thinking that everyone else is light years beyond us. Um, and I think that for a year 1 student, the that advice, focus on learning objectives, on your own learning objectives. Um, and moving towards those things is incredible advice that I wish I would have integrated during my first year instead of striving for performance when when really I could have been leaning into learning and the discomfort that can come from learning. Um, so yes, Matthew was definitely listening in, but he listened in several years ago, um, as we were confronting issues of communication and connection. And I agree with you. For the second year, I think also it's about increasing your own awareness of how you're being received by others, and kind of touches on Dr. Walker's point earlier on understanding your personal, philosophical, and psychological perspective. So, what are we bringing in to that space, and how are we communicating that to other people who are in the space with us? And then, of course, as you say, Matthew, that third year is an opportunity to leverage that into sharing. Dr. Walker, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, first of all, I mean, I don't have the street creds. I haven't been through the program like you have, you and Matthew. So I take extremely seriously what you say. And one of the things I've noticed in this description, this conversation, is, Nicole, you really nail it when you're sort of summarizing what we say and everything. Only it sounds better somehow when it comes from you. It sounds like it was more logical. So I think of that song, you lift us up to be more than we can be, by the way you rephrase and put it together. So thank you for that, Nicole. That's a gift. The only thing I would contribute is that it has been my experience that keeping a journal for all 3 years is important because, and in the journal, you may have different journals, but one of the things that might happen in the journal is you will learn more about some things. You'll see how you reflect on things. It'll help you grow, evolve, refract eventually. And in your communication to the others, if you have the journal and you can say, one of the things I learned from journaling is that how I felt about this and this and this a month ago is much different than I feel now. And the lesson I learned from that is blah, 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 blah. So I think that keeping the journal with the idea that will help you not only communicate to yourself, it will help you in your communications with others. So I think journaling is really important in all our life.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we didn't talk about today that I'm hoping maybe in the future we can bring into another masterclass is, and maybe this is something that we add later, is the influence of ego in communication. Because so many of the parts that we talked about today can be impeded by or supported by one's awareness of the influence of ego. And I think that, that thing that we bring with us into the program where we are terrified that everybody else is going to realize we don't belong, or believes everyone else is way ahead of us, is our ego telling us that we either are way behind and need to catch up, um, or that this isn't an environment where we can just say, hey, I don't understand what a heuristic is. Can you tell me what that means? Because I want to engage with you in a discussion about it. But if I don't know what it is and I have to pretend like I do, I'm missing out on a valuable opportunity to learn. And so I think that maybe as we kind of go into our closing comments, my one of my final thoughts is a journal is an incredible opportunity, and it's not something that I did in the DEL program, but that is something that I do um, every day now as a leader. Um, and I'm writing about everything from observations to feelings. So, like we kind of started our conversation today between separate and connected knowing. I'm bringing those two pieces every day in my journal, which is sitting right in front of me.
Huh?
Connecting what I'm hearing with how it makes me feel. And then my hope is that I'm taking those things that I learn and I'm sharing them with others. And so my hope for our DEL students is that we can increase their awareness that they're not alone, that we are all right there with them, and that this is such an incredible opportunity to grow in oneself, especially when it comes to hard communication. And sometimes hard communication is just admitting that you don't know what ontology and epistemology is when Matthew brings it up in a CAD during the first week of class. Or
Love
it
it.
could be, sitting down in your knee to knee, hearing things about yourself that you were never even aware of. So, gentlemen, as we kind of wrap up, do you have any closing thoughts or comments that you'd like to add to our conversation today? Matthew?
I think that's a wonderful way to kind of bring us towards a close, Nicole. I believe wholeheartedly that communication is all about human connection, and it's a lifelong journey of learning more about ourselves, what makes us tick, um, and that level of self-awareness leads us to be a healthier contributor to the greater community of scholars and to a whole network of individuals that we may not even know yet. So to have grace for ourselves, but also maybe the most courageous thing that we could possibly do is start being honest with ourselves and take a step towards being just a little bit more vulnerable with the people around us. And maybe what we'll find is when we step into that space, that we invite others to do the same. Maybe at the end of the day, that's all we're all really hoping for as leaders. There's something about this collaborative process that we're engaging in as DEL scholars that isn't just about getting a degree or a title, but maybe, perhaps, it's about us helping each other become the healthiest, best version of ourselves as a result of the journey that we're on. But that only happens if we're able to communicate openly and honestly and in a vulnerable way. So I think there's so many opportunities that our Dell scholars have. And the word that I would just leave is be curious and courageous as you interact with each other.
Wow.
Great, thank you.
Wow.
Dr. Walker?
Oh, um, well, just as the mind is not a vessel to be filled, but is a fire to be stoked. So communication is not The quality of communication is not measured by the number of words, but by the impact we have on making and helping us all, and they're involved in this conversation, communication, be the best that we can be in terms of making each better, and individually and collectively better, and making the world a better place.
That's excellent. Well, thank you both for taking time out of your day to share your expert thoughts on communication. As I said previously, when I started thinking about opportunities to share lessons that I learned falling down the mountain, communication was one of the things that rose to the top of my list. And I thought of you both as highly skilled communicators and connectors. And I think that our conversation today has highlighted how important connection is in communication. Whether you're choosing, what you're choosing in your content is important, but how you share that content in a way that connects individuals to the material is the opportunity, I think, that lies in meaningful conversation for all of us. And so thank you both again for your time. Um, I appreciate you joining. And if you have recommendations for reading materials or podcasts or videos